Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me? Is my voice
Yes, we can
audible
hear
enough?
you clearly.
Okay, thanks for the commentary. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our discussion with the title of Hubungan Kerjasama Militer Amerika-Indonesia. Here, my name is Arya Bimotomo. I'm the lecturer of international relations at the UPN Veteran Jawa Timur, and I will be guiding this webinar or this short discussion for approximately 1 or 2 hours from now. Okay, first of all, we are going to listen to an amazing or an interesting theme at the moment. Our theme is about Hubungan Kerjasama Militer Amerika-Indonesia, and as you can imply from the title, this discussion will be conducted in 2 languages. Well, some of our speakers will commence in English, and some of our opening remarks will be done in Indonesian. So yeah, for you guys, for those who are going to ask questions, please feel free to use the chat room, and you can type it in English or in Indonesian, and I will read it out loud. Okay. Also, I would like to ensure that all the participants have their camera on as well as their microphone muted to ensure that this discussion can run smoothly. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Indonesia and the United States have shared a close-knit relations for approximately 70 years, and our interests span in many areas of cooperation, one of which is security. As you know, security is one of the most important factors of international relations. It is always mentioned in the mainstream discourse of international relations. And today, we are going to listen to our fascinating speaker about how is the ongoing relations, especially security or military relations between Indonesia and United States. And hopefully, from this discussion, we will get a glimpse of how is the relations going and how can we capitalize on these relations for years ahead. But beforehand, I would like to invite some of our guest speakers, some other experts to give their acknowledgement about this event. First of all, I would like to invite Ms. Renita Dwi Hapsari, the lecturer at the International Relations Department. Yeah, she's my colleague, and she will be giving an opening remark before we start with the discussion. Okay, Mbak Renita, could you please open your microphone, and yeah, the stage is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, Bimo. May I start right now?
Yes, you may.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Mrs. Angie Miser, as the Head of Public Affairs Officer of U.S. Consulate General Surabaya. Good evening, Mr. Andre Rivier, as the Managing Partner of Advanced Bridge Asia. And good morning to all participants who join in today's discussion. First of all, as a representative of International Relations Department of UPN Veteran Jawa Timur, I would like to thank U.S. Consulate General Club for the trust and opportunity given to us to organize today's discussions. Regarding today's discussion, I already know that the United States is a country with the most powerful military power in the world, and a great opportunity for Indonesia when the 2 countries established a strategic partnership in military field. And since 2006, the U.S. its military embargo. The defense cooperation between Indonesia and the U.S. has been steadily improving in terms of number of activities, the scope of cooperation, and level of engagement. The U.S. has just most prominent defense partner in terms of number of annual exercises and events. The Indonesia Armed Forces and U.S. Army Pacific also conduct Garuda Shield, which focus on peace support training capacity and stability operations. Indonesia also participates in more extensive multilateral or regional exercises, including cooperation of world readiness training and Rim of the Pacific or RIMPAC. In 2015, the Minister for Defense of Indonesia and the U.S. Secretary of Defense signed a joint statement. The two countries have increased its cooperation in several areas, including border security, cybersecurity, counterterrorism, counter-transnational threats, maritime security, maritime domain awareness, peacekeeping operation and training, humanitarian assistance and disaster response. And after President Donald Trump's leadership changed to Joe Biden, Indonesia is again considered as an important strategic partner of the U.S. in Southeast Asia. The Indonesian foreign minister also confessed this in her statement that in the new era of Indonesia and U.S. relations, Indonesia will become the center of establishing a safe and prosperous Indo-Pacific region. On the other hand, developing such as the economic power of China and the AUKUS alliance. In addition, along with the development in the digital era, several countries have also begun to be wary of the use of artificial intelligence and Chinese weapons in the military field. In the military sectors formed between the two countries, we hope that the Indonesia could follow and adapt to these developments. Today's discussion is also expected to provide a more comprehensive picture of military cooperation between the two countries. And I hope that this academic discussion become a forum for sharing knowledge for all of us. Maybe that's all I can say as an and thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Renita, for your opening remarks. For information, Mbak Renita is also focusing her studies in the security studies as well as your military studies. And thanks for your opening remarks. Hopefully, it can give us some outlines about what we are going to discuss today. And or maybe watch an opening video from Ms. Angie Militer. I hope I pronounce your name correctly. Okay, from the heart of PR, the Consulate General of the United States. Okay, for the committee, could you please help me in displaying the video, because it was said that there will be a video from the Consulate General of the United States in Surabaya.
Hello, good morning, Mas Aryo. I would like to. So it's nice to meet you virtually. Good morning, Mbak Renita, and good morning, Rivier. I am Pugu Budi Susatyo. I am the Cultural Affairs Assistant of U.S. Consulate General Surabaya. This morning, I would like to deliver. So I would like to share the measure. Do apologize because she could not join the discussion in this morning. However, we have already recorded what she would like to deliver to open the discussion, which is very, very important for us in terms of sharing the knowledge about the military partnership between the government of Indonesia and the government of the United States of America. So I have already been set by the host as the co-host, so I would like to share the video from Ibu Angie Militer. Wait.
Hi everyone, I'm Angie Mizora. I'm the head of public affairs at the U.S. Consulate General in Surabaya here in Indonesia. I'm sorry I can't be there with you live in person, and I'm so thrilled that some of my colleagues are able to join you for the discussion today with the Madat Club to commemorate Kahin's month. I had the privilege of opening the month as well with you, and was just an amazing discussion, and to see the legacy and inspiration of George Kahin here with this forum was really wonderful. As you know, the United States and Indonesia have shared 70 years of diplomatic partnerships with the bilateral ties. We have a common interest in having a prosperous, wealthy, and democratic Indonesia, and also a secure Indonesia and Indo-Pacific region. And today you'll be talking about the U.S. and Indonesia security partnership. And this is a partnership that has really broadened and deepened over the years and through the decades. And it's thanks to constant participation in dozens of annual engagements, cooperation on border security, counterproliferation, cybersecurity, counterterrorism, maritime security, maritime domain awareness, peacekeeping operations, humanitarian assistance, disaster response, and the list goes on. And this is a partnership that will grow and develop even stronger in the future because of these strong ties between our two countries. So once again, I want to say I wish you a very fruitful discussion, an open and honest discussion. And it's forums like this that are really important, that showcase the educational ties between the United States and Indonesia and the importance of these people-to-people ties. When we have connections, when we have open forums, when we have discussions like this, it really makes the understanding between people stronger, the understanding between our two countries and culture stronger. So we really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this, and would like to remind you, of course, to check out our social media, our website, and stay in touch with us, because there are scholarship programs that we have that bring young leaders to the United States, students and scholars to the United States. We have all sorts of program and outreach opportunities that we want to invite you to take part in with us, both virtually and hopefully some in person as well. So please come check us out. We welcome you, and please, my team who's on the event tonight, please reach out to them if you have any questions, and we're always here for you. Thank you again, and I hope you have a wonderful session.
Yep. So as you heard, that I think what Mbak Renita and also Bu Angie said this morning are on the same page. So hopefully the discussion will have a great impact to the audience to understand and to know better about the military partnership between Indonesia and the United States. As also Bu Angie mentioned, that we are in the public affairs section. We offer many program opportunities, including the cultural and also the exchange. During the discussion, I will share my contacts. So all of the participants could contact me and drop your questions, perhaps regarding the cultural programs. And I also hope that we could have in touch also, especially with the Department of International Relations of National Development University. Actually, I have a colleague there. Her name is Ibu Maria Indira. Correct me if I'm wrong. So she's my not a classmate, but we attend university together when we were in college. Okay. So that's all from me. Once all our participants will have the great moment to enjoy the discussion. Okay. I remember one thing. For the best questions, I'm 5 a day. I hope that Madat or the host will select the best 5 questions, because there will be like some little souvenirs from U.S. Consulate General Surabaya. So hopefully everybody will be enjoy the discussion.
Okay, thank you, Mas Puku, representing the Consulate General of the United States in Surabaya, Ms. Angie Mizer. Okay, thanks for your remarks. And also, I would like to remind everyone in this room, I would like to reiterate what Mas Puku has said. I would like to deliver it in Indonesian also. Bagi teman-teman yang punya pertanyaan, silakan gunakan chatroom. Nanti 5 penanya terbaik akan diberikan apresiasi dari tim Konsulat Jenderal Amerika Serikat di Surabaya. Okay, so guys, for the 5 best questions, please your best questions, give your best comments in the session, because the American Consul General will appreciate your questions with, I don't know, with some surprise at the end of the session. Okay, thank you guys. And after this, I guess we can move forward to our main session. Our main session will be delivered by He is the managing partner and co-founder of the Defense Bridge Asia. And he was also the vice president for global partner operations at the US Army, 2018 and 2020. And for his educational background, I'd like to give some background about him. Yeah, he was educated at the Bachelor of Science in Economics at the United States Military Academy at West Point. He got his master's degree in international relations at the Yale University. And he also worked as the embedded consultant at the US Embassy in Bangkok, 2008 to 2011. And yeah, as I mentioned previously, he was the vice president for global operations at the US Army. And he was the managing partner and co-founder of Defense Bridge Asia. First of all, I would like to Mr. Andre.
Well,
Hello,
thank you very much.
Yeah, good evening, I guess, yeah, Mr. Andre.
Yep. Good evening here. And selamat pagi to you.
Yeah, thank you. Greetings from Indonesia, and it's a bit noisy here, but yeah, the internet is not. Okay, thank you, Mr. Andre. Hopefully, we can get an insight about the military relations between Indonesia and the United States after your session. And yeah, I asked for your permission to collect 5 best questions so that we can get some appreciation from the Consulate General of the United States in Surabaya. Okay, without further ado, I guess we can give the stage to Pak Andre. And for the audience, please prepare your best questions because as the Consulate General has mentioned, we will be picking 5 best questions, and then we will give them some prize at the end of the session. You can use some features. You can use the raise hands feature. You can use some chat room if you are unable to speak or turn on your camera. So feel free, but we do hope that you can experience and you can display some engagement in the discussion. Okay, so I give the stage to you, Mr. Andre. You can begin.
Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate the invitation to come out and speak to everybody. Indonesia is a country which is very close to my heart. I studied it in grad school. I always wanted to be assigned to Indonesia, but I've never had the opportunity to actually work there, unfortunately. But it is one of my favorite places. Whenever I have a chance, I go holiday there. And so this is great to talk to you. By way of introduction, I am a retired US Army officer. I spent 20 years active duty, of which my last 12 was a embassy-based specialist in Southeast Asia. So I studied Southeast Asia at grad school, primarily Indonesia. And then I worked assignments in embassies in Thailand, Laos, Papua New Guinea, Fiji, also Afghanistan, and not quite in Southeast Asia, but so be it. Working in the security cooperation field primarily, so the countries. I never had a chance to go back to Indonesia, which is deeply, I never quite worked out with timing. But Indonesia was my study at Indonesian relationship with the U.S. was my study at grad school. So I say that my knowledge is a little bit outdated on Indonesia, to be very honest. But I can speak overall. I've been very much tracking security cooperation policy around the region in Southeast Asia and globally. I can speak often in larger terms if I don't know something for Indonesia. Since I retired 2 years ago, I work for a company in Singapore, and I also founded a defense and business consulting company with some colleagues of mine. We're primarily in the Philippines and Singapore, Vietnam, and Thailand right now, but we are trying to enter Indonesia as we speak. We're working some contracts there, but right now, just for clarity, we have no business in Indonesia, so I can speak very openly. I'll also say one thing that I can do right now, which I couldn't do before when I worked at the embassy. I very honestly and very, I don't have to speak any talking points. I don't have to repeat, what I'm supposed to say. I can say what I think, which is very liberating. And I can give you the honest opinion and honest feedback. So please keep your questions coming. Whenever I talk to people, there's always questions I don't think about, especially with US policy, very hard to understand from a distance. It can be very confusing. And so I recognize there's a lot of questions out there. And a lot of times what seems like a complicated decision by US decision makers is really something either made due to ignorance or politics. And I'd say that's certainly the case with Indonesia, with US-Indonesia over the last 70 years. I would honestly say there's not been very much strategic thought by US policymakers on how to engage Indonesia. It's been very much a back and forth where we react to something, then we forget about Indonesia, then we react, with politics very much involved, and also ignorance, frankly, in which most Americans probably could not find on a map, to be very honest. It's the world's fourth most populous country, extremely important, but from a policymaker perspective, just Americans don't really know much about it. And this is probably a problem for Indonesia. Where in countries like India, which US policy well gets a lot of attention, very nuanced thought, Indonesia tends to not get the same amount of thought. And so it is, as you look at policy, US policy towards Indonesia over the years, it does seem very chaotic and very confused. And it's partially because of ignorance. And I say that just to be very frank with you, one of the challenges. And I think I'll go start from the beginning briefly, just from my understanding of where we were and where we've come. The US and Indonesia had a very rocky start. And there's books written about this. Really, Indonesia was shortly after World War II, the US began engaging Indonesia without and this really came into the most clear contrast when the US government did not talk to itself. We had the US Defense Department was supporting the government of Indonesia. In the meantime, the newly formed CIA was trying to overthrow the government of Indonesia, and these guys were working at odds. And that culminated, of course, in a shoot down of a CIA plane in Sulawesi, the capture of and embarrassment with the U.S. out of that whole operation. And the U.S. traded him for C-130 aircraft, which was our first military assistance in Indonesia, was trading for a pilot shot down in a very sloppy operation back in the 1950s. And this was the beginning of our relationship. And this sort of set the tone, quite unfortunately. The US very quickly forgot about this. Indonesians did not. It was on my policymakers in the Arno and Suharto era. Certainly the senior defense officials were aware of this. This became a bit of a cloud over the relationship going forward. And the US again forgot Indonesia. It was just not that important. It was important to us from American policymakers in the 60s in that it was literally past deep water from the Pacific to the Indian Ocean. So there were submarines passing through. So there was interest in keeping Indonesia as a anti-communist area as part of the Cold War, where the US could move ships and submarines across from the two oceans without worrying about a foreign power intercepting. And this sort of need for a maritime passage was really the dominant theme of the relationship for quite a while. And the US at this point really was realpolitik, where there was no anything other than US interest. And so again, the US was happy to support, right now would seem horrific, to include certainly the massacre of communists, suspected communists. It probably did not necessarily actively support, but certainly did not oppose. This was an era when the US was very much focused purely on our own interests. And this was also important in that US or maybe direct approval to Indonesia for the invasion of East Timor. It was certainly something that was provided by the US to the government, possibly behind the scenes, by Henry Kissinger. But at the same time, when Indonesia did invade Timor-Leste, it was with understanding of US support. It was a dynamic. This was pretty important. The invasion of Timor, and the US supported that, was very much caused problems in the future as well. Since, for example, Saddam Hussein, when he invaded Kuwait, actually cited the Timor example, saying the US didn't object to the Indonesian attack of Timor. So people don't want to object to me invading Kuwait. Quite frankly, that was a mistake by him. But this was, again, the US relationship with Indonesia was purely in Cold War terms. And at the time, we saw Timor as being, East Timor as being a left-leaning government, Indonesia being supportive of the US aim, This was important till about 1991. And this was when the relationship really changed from an American perspective. And this is two things happened in 1991. Number one is the end of the Cold War. This is when the Berlin Wall fell, the Soviet Union collapsed, and the US became sort of the dominant power with the Soviet Union no longer. Russia became sort of a corrupt shell of itself, and there was no longer need to worry about Cold War aims. And I'll back up 1 second and say something about US politics, which is different from most other countries in Asia. The US has a very short-term memory from a political standpoint. And this is good and bad. And I'll say the good, first of all. The good of having a short-term memory is the US can be, you know, our enemies in World War II are our best friends now. The US has got a great relationship with Japan, with Germany, countries for a long time. My company is very active in losing to them just a few decades ago. So the US is very quick to forget, whereas most Asian countries have longer memories. You still see, for example, Korea and Japan fighting over World War II, where that's long forgotten from the US perspective. Is that we tend to forget our friends as well, and we very quickly turn on countries when we no longer need them, or we going wrong. And so often the East and West don't align. US short-term memory, Asia long-term memory. These do create problems and expectation issues. This is important to remember going forward. So 1991, for the end of the Cold War, and second of all, you had the shootings in the cemetery, the Santa Cruz Cemetery in East Timor, when essentially a video, this is when the dawn of the video camera, and recording Indonesian soldiers probably acting on their own, not under orders, but Indonesian soldiers shooting protesters in East Timor. And what made this important is that this video was put on the news, and the news was watched by US politicians. And one politician in particular, who's very important to talk about in this conversation, and again, this is something I wouldn't say in the embassy, Patrick Leahy of Vermont, US Senator. And also he had an advisor for human rights. And Senator Leahy saw this video, or certainly someone showed him this video, and he then really pushed the administration to restrict weapons to Indonesia. And what he was upset about, they were using M16 rifles. US provided M16 rifles, which are very obviously visible weapons. And the administration was very with Indonesia at this point. There was no more Cold War. And so we're very quick to start cracking down on human rights issues and restricting security cooperation because of this. Security cooperation got better, again, improved. And then more, and on 199 was shooting as the Indonesian military retreated from East Timor. And again, sanctions kicked in again. And as a matter of fact, Senator Leahy put an amendment in place, basically a law we call the Leahy Law, which is basically an addition to the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAAs, which says that any country that commits a human rights violation cannot receive security. And just going forward from there, actually went up and down. The U.S. started putting Indonesia conditions which weren't enforced. The U.S. before, so aircraft, it became an issue for education, whereas Indonesian officers who previously trained in the U.S. and was cut off. We created what we called a lost generation of officers who didn't understand the U.S., had no relationship with U.S. officials, which is who are leading in the military right now, this sort of lost generation leading at that time. And then going forward, and I'm telling the story very quickly, so glossing over a lot of key points in the way. But the next big issue was things did improve for Indonesia, certainly under the Yudhoyono or the SB. There was a big push to the military. In fact, I'd say it's been one of the big success stories of the last 20 years, has been how reformed since 1991 or since the 90s. and become more in line, certainly what the U.S. would like. And the other, of course, thing was a war on terror. 2001, the U.S. was Al-Qaeda attacked the U.S. There was a global response, probably a global overreaction, quite frankly, to the war on terror, but so be it. The U.S. Was actively involved in Afghanistan, was involved in Philippines, and also was involved after the Bali nightclub became involved along with Australia in Indonesia. And this really changed things. Again, I mentioned the necessity from 1991 to 1999. I'm sorry, 1991 to 2001. There was no need for the U.S. to be involved in Indonesia. The policymakers saw no reason to overlook human rights issues or perceived to be wrong. Whereas in 2001, that changed. Indonesia then became useful to U.S. policymakers from a defense perspective. It's unfortunate to say that, but that is how people tend to think in the U.S. in the high-level decision-making. So there was a sea change as well. I will say that the U.S. would like that, certainly for the last 20 years or so, the U.S. is probably pushing faster than Indonesian leaders would like to restore the defense relationship. Again, the U.S. is a very short-term memory for policy. We forget previous slights that we may have made, whereas the leadership of the TN had grown up really in that period where the U.S. was an unreliable partner, and there was less desire to re-engage so quickly. So there was great engagement after 9/11, and I got to say that from a working in government, the Indonesian response to the terrorist threat was. You talk about Detkus 88, which was a police version, the police anti-terrorist, probably one of the most effective operations in the entire world dealing with as far as being not just blowing up buildings, but really trying to people doing all these things that we talked about. And so the U.S. really became Indonesia became very much being professional, having the best counterterrorism program in the world, being involved in peacekeeping operations. So the U.S. versus Indonesia was doing great, save for Senator Patrick Leahy, who was still very much opposed to everything. And then this calls, for example, 10 years ago, began selling Apache A-64 helicopters to Indonesian. This was a huge, painful process for both sides. Senator Leahy began to really push back on the enforcement, making sure that that involved vetting every single person who was involved in even. There was a lot of disputes from the defense perspective. This was more in terms of politicians, the U.S. Congress, and people like myself who were in the security cooperation apparatus who wanted to provide assistance. The requirements for vetting. We had issues, for example, with somebody who had violations, which is a huge issue for former Kopassus officers, former special operations officers from Indonesia who had spent time in Kopassus long after anything in Timor, but were still seen as suspects. And so this was a very painful process from the U.S. perspective. Memorandums and a lot of emails and letters and briefings to Congress were done. We were successful from providing the assistance to Indonesia, but it certainly was slow and painful. And I think there was a lot of ill will created with the TNI by being so difficult in how we provided something, which frankly Indonesia bought themselves. There was no grant aid. Indonesia paid Indonesia money to pay for the aircraft. A bit broader in a second. There's a couple pieces of good news happening right now from a perspective going forward, and I'm very optimistic about the relationship. Good news number one is that the Indonesia is very much involved. The U.S. sees Indonesia as very important as part of the region. The U.S. right now is very much focused on countering Russia in Ukraine and dealing with the issues in Europe, but still there's a lot of attention to Asia and certainly to Asia maritime security issues, East China Sea, South China Sea, Taiwan Strait. And Indonesia, of course, has a huge maritime, including all the passages from east to west. It has a claim on the South China Sea via Natuna Islands, which Indonesia has been active in pushing. Indonesia is the largest country in ASEAN by military size, by economy, by population, has a huge role in ASEAN. And of course, the US, like the ASEAN, take a stronger stance on maritime security. So there's overlap on this. Terrorism is still an issue, a very minor issue for the US right now. It's not something that people think about much, but it's still a minor issue. And Indonesia is still very much involved in a very positive way in dealing with extremism. So you have those two core issues, which certainly bind us together and keep us in that, again, still focused on Indonesia. Second of all, we've really had to grapple with our human rights issues overall, and a lot of how we enforce sanctions. And so India has been a really key point for this, really pushing things forward. So India, as you know, is a huge country, very interesting ties to the US over years, sort of like Indonesia. It's been back and forth. India has a very hard relationship with China, very tough. They're in active fighting off. And this has really brought the US and India together in a way which we've never seen before. And you may have heard about the Quad. I've been working on most of my military career, where we're trying to bring, and the US has brought in Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and India in sort of a unofficial partnership. That has really brought us together. But what that means, India's got problems too. So India's been violating US in several ways. They violated, the non-proliferation treaty years ago. They have been a lot of political issues which involve oppression of minorities in the country. The US is very focused on not oppressing religious minorities, which has been a case there. They've been purchasing Russian weapons against US sanctions, or against US rules. So, but we've got a really big buy on this. India can really do what they want, quite frankly. And so because of this, Indonesia is very much in the same category as India, and that's a large, important country. US is not going to sanction Indonesia right now. I don't see it happening. And so this is a big change. And the third thing is Senator Leahy's retiring next year. He's announced his plans to retire in 2022. He's not running for office. Again, I don't know the future of Tim Reiser, but with Senator Leahy stepping down, that is the biggest anti-Indonesia voice in Congress stepping down. And I think the only anti-Indonesia voice in Congress. And so that will, I don't know how much it'll change things, but that will certainly make things easier. Senator Leahy has been, and he's a love, I don't want to denigrate him. He's passionate. He's well-meaning. He's been a leader in the US for years, but strong opinion against the US arming Indonesia in any way or having cooperation with Indonesia. And that will change very shortly. I think this year, that is, for people who work in embassies, that is a big sigh of relief. Because person not sending you 30 emails a week asking for details and guidance about every last person. So this will change things. So I think the path is very positive with US Indonesia right now, and it's across the region. Again, from when I started off as a Southeast Asia specialist for the Army, when I began training for this line of work, and I chose the region, it was seen as sort of a backwater. Right now, Southeast Asia is front and center in US policy. It really is. Certainly, again, Ukraine is a major issue right now, but there's a very real push to guarantee the sovereignty of the waterways. To be very frank, the US is very concerned about Taiwan and the future of Taiwan status and what that might draw the US into. There's concerns about the South China Sea militarization. These are all major issues, and Southeast Asia is front and center. And I think with Indonesia's status, again, the largest country in ASEAN, the largest military, the largest economy, the largest population, very important geography. There's going to be a lot of attention paid to Indonesia in the future. I don't think American policymakers are getting smarter on Indonesia. I think there's too much distraction with places in Europe or elsewhere on it. But there's not that anti-sentiment reflex of a couple of years ago in 1991 or 1999. So I think things are fairly positive moving forward. I would bring up kind of two issues just to throw out there. There are two challenges that are faced by companies certainly engaging Indonesia. First one is not really a company challenge, but how the US relates to Australia, which is important. And I dealt with this, again, I was our attaché to the Pacific Islands. I covered Papua New Guinea, I covered Solomon Islands, all these countries in Australia's backyard, so to speak. And there's a lot of tension with the US and Australia on how we engage in certain ways. I mean, it's very, very low level tension, but we are very much allies. But of course, it's disagreements among friends. And Indonesia being so close to Australia, really Australia being a major, probably the biggest donor and very much involved. 88, I mentioned earlier, was really Australia's, really built that, which got a lot of goodwill from the US. But if we disagree on an issue, I would tell you right now, the US will probably defer to Australia. And this is important. Australia's government is a little less, US government is more, we have a different executive and legislative branch that may be at odds. That makes our policy more consistent, if often strange. Australia, of course, has one government which changes all the time. And so there's been a bit of a change. If foreign policy can change. So there may be a future where Australia objects to, say, an execution of an Australian citizen again. Something happens that really gets Australia, will then be in a pressure place. We have to be happy. And that's one thing I'll say is always a risk that the US, will probably defer to Australia if there is a need to push on certain areas. Now, there'll be long discussions behind the scenes. But just a side note here, this is something, because that relationship to the US. Second is just from a defense company perspective, it is a very hard place to work, to sell equipment to distance. Indonesia still has challenges in defense procurement. It's not transparent in a way it might be in other countries. There is, there's news we're following because it relates to, from my business side, contracts that change all the time, and nobody knows why, what happened at high levels in Indonesian government, why a decision was made to go with this company. There's still issues with practices which are illegal in the US for military companies, which does make it very hard for US companies to do business. I won't say bribery, but sometimes there's a bit of money or fees exchange hands to make procurement go forward. Less now than in the past, but it does make it hard for US companies. There's still sort of challenges there, which do make it difficult to complete procurement deals in a way which makes sense for Indonesia. And that's out there as well. But I would tell you, it's a very positive trajectory moving forward for Southeast Asia, for Indonesia. Indonesia, I studied Indonesian in grad school. I tell my kids to study Indonesian. It really, I think, as you look at the future of global commerce, it's sort of like from an American business perspective, it's really an undervalued stock. I think it's going to have its moment in the next 20 years, really jumping in the world stage, see the GDP shoot up. I do see a lot of future there. And I do think the Indonesia-US relationship will only get better. I don't really see any major obstacles. I mentioned Australia, I mentioned challenges to procurement, but these are minor issues. And bigger problems and other relationships the US has. So things are looking very positive. If I were a betting person, and I guess I'm a businessman, I am involved in decisions. We are trying to get actively there. I'm trying to get all our companies involved in Indonesia that I'm tied to, because it is a place I think we need to be from a defense and a business perspective, simply because it is, I think, right. And with that, I'll be quiet for a second. It's a long speech. I apologize for talking so long, but I do want to open up for questions. And I know a lot of other experts on this call as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Andre, for your fascinating explanation. So I would like to wrap up a little bit with some interesting points. First of all, we have examined that the relationship between Indonesia and the United States have been changing along with the global trends. And after the Cold War, we have this vibrant relations between Indonesia and the United States. As we are now, we can say that we are the natural leader of Southeast Asia. We have the most population in Southeast Asia, and also we've been doing we've been showing some improvement in terms of human rights and counterterrorism. And of course, there will be some challenges ahead, but we can conclude that from from the trends between Indonesia and the United States relations, there will be some promises to work on in the future. Okay, I would like to invite some of our audience to ask maybe 3 questions for Pak Andre Rivier. Okay, we have one audience here, Gideon Chandra. Okay, thanks for your participation. Gideon, could you please open your microphone? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Hello, friend. My name is So, I'm going to state forward for my question. Is that the reasons why US is getting first just that US wants to balance the power with China that and
Sorry, Gideon. I guess yeah, your your voice is not quite audible. So could you please type your question in the chat room, and I will proceed with the second question first of all.
Okay. Am I audible, Mr. Bimo?
Yes, yeah, it's better now. Could you please deliver your question once again? Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry for that. Thank you, Mr. Bimo, for the recognitions, and good morning, Mr. Andrew. My name is Gideon, and I'm from Indonesia, of course. So I'm going to be straightforward about my questions. This is about the U.S. intentions over Indonesia relations in terms of military operations. So my question is that true that the reasons why U.S. is strengthening cooperations to Indonesia is just to balancing powers to upon China domain in South China Sea? And I hope my question is clear.
No, it's a very good question. Sorry, go ahead, please. It's a very good question. I gotta say there's 2 things. So that is not the case. The US has a lot of interest in Indonesia overall. So first of all, there's a lot going on, but I will say this, when you look at what takes, which is very multifaceted, there's interest economically in business, there's interest in cooperation across environmental issues, across all realm of issues. Everything from votes in the UN, who's going to host the Olympics. These are all met greatly in the US. And then embassies, I worked on everything, all kinds of issues, which are very minor. Prisoner exchanges, all kinds of small issues. And there's a lot that goes on that's outside the South China Sea or anything with China. From a policymaker, from a senior leader perspective, from the president, from the National Security Council, there's limited attention span in certain areas. And sometimes one has to get their attention. And this is where it becomes more important over there. So for me as a Southeast Asia specialist, for anyone who works in the embassy, they're looking at a whole myriad of issues. And I bring up the environment, everything else, which are US all the time. From a senior attention span issue. And sometimes to couch things in terms of South China Sea issues. And that's certainly a way to get attention. But it's not the only thing. It's just a focus there. But it is bringing attention back. And I think in an embassy perspective, those who work in embassies, we call it playing the China card sometimes. We should call it playing and try to get an issue you care about by relating to China somehow, even a bit of an exaggeration. And so, but this is sort of a function of US politics. But I think if there is no China, I will say 2 things. First, the US is not trying to, I know for a fact, is not trying to make an alliance of countries against China. It's more of a chance to just have a shared interest in things like open seas navigation. There's not really a need to align anyone against China. That's not an issue like the Cold War. I think the US is certainly, policymakers are savvy enough to know that push. There's a lot of issues out there, and I'm sure that the consulate is on every other China for that high level issue which sits above there, and it's just a way to get people's attention. Does that answer your question? It's kind of complicated. It's like any other policymaker, people just are minded and he's getting their attention by, as we say, playing the China card.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Andre Rivier, for your answer. I hope that quite concludes. I hope that quite answering a question from Gideon. Okay, secondly, I would like to also read a question from. This is also his name is Torik Haikal. Greetings, sir. My name is Torik Haikal. I would like to ask a question. As we can see now, tension in the South China Sea China our oil exploration on Natuna Island, which is claimed to be within the China's territory. So the question is, in your opinion, is there any possibility that Indonesia or maybe the United States will start a battle? If yes, is there any possibility for the Indonesian military troops have any, like within the NATO or AUKUS, or there are any strategies conducted together between Indonesia and the US in maintaining peace and to stem, I guess, to a net fund?
Question. I'll tell you the answer is yes. And I think you can see it in Ukraine right now. I'll tell you right now, important. And I'm again speaking out of the government. Treaties are important. NATO's treaty, Article 5 of NATO, which requires us to go to aid, but Asian sense are a bit hard to understand. The U.S. has a policy which we call strategic ambiguity about going to war. That being said, oftentimes policymakers simply don't know until you know what's going on. Even for the South China Sea, a country like Philippines, with a long-standing treaty relationship with the U.S. support a fishing vessel was attacked by a Chinese Coast Guard vessel. The answer is process, but a lot depends on how we got there. If Philippines kind of forced the issue, if the U.S. said don't do this and the issue is forced, then maybe back off a little bit. But if it's something whereupon China's being the aggressor, I think the U.S. would certainly go to war for Philippines or for Indonesia. And you can see this right now in Ukraine. U.S. actions in Ukraine are probably pretty illustrative of how the U.S. would support a non-treaty ally or around the world. Ukraine's a country the U.S. is interested in, certainly a country we have a tie to, but no treaty with Ukraine. U.S. is concerned about U.S. from intervening directly, but there's pretty direct aid and training across the border. Frankly, if Russia were to use chemical weapons in Kyiv, I think the U.S. would probably commit troops to that point. If they were to violate sort of the norms of war as the West defines. So in Natuna Islands, Indonesia came to the U.S. for there be support, and if there's more allied support, even more so. So if Indonesia were to get ASEAN support, we're able to get support from other countries. Were to get to enlist Australia, other countries to support, you'd have tremendous support as well. So a lot goes to alliances and how Indonesia works alliances, and having the U.S. doesn't like to help countries just one-on-one, but having an sort of coalition to support Indonesia would be. I do think that if with never saying never, a Coast Guard vessel directly attacked Indonesian or up to including combat.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Andre. Okay. For Hike, have any follow-up question, or is that enough? Okay. Okay. Well, audience, we still got time for before we move forward to our second session of question and answer. Would you like or just type? Okay, we've got two. Oh, how many? One. Okay, one audience is raising his hand. Chami, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Andre Rippers. I'm a student. A question. If we look at China's massive power deployment in Southeast Asia, or sort of the China Sea and conflict by America and NATO power, have an indication that entire fall into agreement. Any possibility nuclear power will a dominant weapon for this conflict?
I'm sorry, maybe I understand your question. So you're concerned about China being able to take over Southeast Asia? I apologize, I missed that.
Okay, Khalid, could you please reiterate it in Indonesian maybe, or again?
Okay, if we look at China's massive power development in Southeast Asia, or sort of the China Sea, prodded by America and NATO powers, have an indication that entire Southeast Asia will fall into war with China. Any possibility nuclear power will a dominant weapon for this conflict? Thank you.
No, that's a very good question. I understand what you're saying. Yes, this is a problem. Certainly nuclear war is the last thing anybody wants. And quite frankly, if there was no risk of nuclear war, the US would be in Ukraine right now on the ground. The nuclear risk keeps us from even supporting a no-fly zone. And so in any kind of conflict with China, that would be the overwhelming concern. How do you keep it from going nuclear? This is obviously bad for everybody. Certainly, I don't know Chinese nuclear capabilities as much as Russian, but it wouldn't be good for anybody in the US or Australia or any country which might be a target, certainly not for China. So everybody wants to avoid that. I mean, what a war looks like is really up for debate if everything ever, how it might look. It would ideally be smaller. I think certainly the way that the US would understand a war to be more of a naval engagement, very minor naval engagement, where China simply tries to keep the US out of the West Pacific by crippling aircraft carriers, by our fleet primarily, and then cutting off sea lanes. And so cutting off, for example, South China Sea, cutting off Australia's ability to respond to anything in East Asia. So these are things which really the maritime domain is where you see most of the fighting. And also you mentioned cybersecurity. All these areas are domains of warfare as well, space. But, I think if I were predicting things, I would say a limited naval engagement would be probably what it looks like. And I really doubt Southeast Asian countries would be pulled into it. I think that most likely, and certainly from my experience working in the region, Indonesia and other countries would probably an egregious attack by China on another ASEAN country. I think there'd be Indonesia countries who are not involved, neutral, and US and China would respect that. I think that's probably what would happen, but there would still be the Indonesian waterways would still probably be a bit of a battleground in that it is strategic waterways, especially the kind of passages between the islands that lead to the Indian Ocean. There'd be probably some naval fighting or naval blockades over there, but certainly Indonesia would be allowed to stay neutral. But it's very hard to predict, obviously. And again, everybody's interest would be to avoid nuclear war, to keep it small. And there's a lot of thought has been put in an American perspective. How do you provide ways to de-escalate? How do you provide ways to communicate? How do you allow China to save face? How do you allow the US to save face? There's a lot of effort put into this. And so, even if things start ratcheting up for tensions, how does one de-escalate is a major question. And I think that would probably avoid the risk. When Americans look at the risk of nuclear war from a perspective, when I was in government, there was a real worry about Russia because there's a sense that Russia was a bit more unstable in the leadership sense than China, which had a more stable leadership, the way the US viewed it. That may change in the future, but certainly from a prediction standpoint, US is less national launch of nuclear weapons by China. It would be safe from Russia.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Andrew Rivier. I would like to confirm whether so that Andrew Ervin raised his hand. Is that true?
Yes, I did.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Is it my time to? Okay. I apologize in advance because my camera is not working. So I'm just gonna cut straight to the point. So knowing that Indonesia implement a free and active foreign policy, as we all know, meaning that we're not neutral and we're working with almost everyone. We're working with States, the Chinese government and the Russians and almost. And my question is, how does the say align themselves with this foreign policy? How does the U.S. government see in the future on working with Indonesia regarding with this foreign policy, Indonesian foreign policy?
No, great question. That is, I think what the U.S. says versus what the U.S. does differ in this respect. And this goes, I'll point out Russia right now. So Russia is a clear example. So a couple of years ago, the U.S. put sanctions on Russia after they invaded Georgia. The U.S. put sanctions on them. A list of sanctions called CATSA, which was essentially what it did is it forbid any country from purchasing weapons from Russia. And if they did, they'd be sanctioned. Now, this was put out by Congress. I'm sitting in the embassy in Laos when this happened. And of course, Laos gets all their weapons from Russia. And the U.S. was, the ambassador asked me what she thought, what to do about this. And we kind of read the law as sort of a non-law, not a real one. It was sort of written with no, we didn't have to enforce it in an embassy perspective. Because frankly, look at countries like Vietnam, look at India, who have tremendous purchases from Russia, even now, even with the attack on Ukraine. The U.S. is not going to enforce sanctions. Anything. I may be wrong, but I seriously doubt the U.S. will do anything, even now with Russia being a pariah state and the U.S. trying to enforce sanctions. I don't see the U.S. doing anything to any country who would purchase weapons from Russia or oil or anything else. We'd certainly have diplomatic discussions behind closed doors, make some statements publicly, but I don't see any change. And the U.S. understands this. I mean, from a high-level perspective, down to the lowest level, everyone understands that Southeast Asia has a long tradition of neutrality. And Indonesia's got a long tradition of neutrality, of being online, of trying to find the middle way. And we also recognize the impossible countries in when you have, especially when you have China and the U.S., or you have Russia with a long history of providing weapons or tourism and other functions to support Indonesia. And we recognize that. So I would tell you that I don't think anything would change. And you have to look at when laws are written and how they're enforced are different. I don't know for a fact. I do think policymakers write laws in the U.S. in such a way often to allow a loophole. And just for your knowledge, in Laos, we got the law from Congress saying that that if Laos were to purchase equipment, we would cut them off. And the ambassador was upset. So we looked at the law, and I told the ambassador, I think this law is written in such a way that if Laos buys them from the it's the government side of Rosaborn Export, their arms export company versus the civil side, then it's no sanctions to be issued. And the ambassador agreed, and we didn't enforce sanctions because of that. So I think there's enough loophole, but we certainly found it. No one called us on it. So that, yeah, I think that we should keep on being a neutral country. And I think the U.S. is, and I'll say one more thing too. Indonesia being where they are right now, being a large country with a big economic relationship, with a growing strategic importance, can really get away with a lot more. If you're a country like Cambodia, where you're smaller, there's just harder to, there may be more push, but Indonesia will never have an issue, at least in the next few years.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Andrew, for your Rivier for your explanation. First of all, I would like to ask the host. Excuse me, I'm going to use Indonesian. Teman-teman panitia, kita punya waktu berapa lama lagi? Apakah masih cukup untuk satu pertanyaan lagi?
Masih cukup, Pak, sampai 9.30.
9.30, oke. Sepertinya satu atau dua pertanyaan lagi. We have already got 4 audience who asked their question. We have Gideon, Haikal, Khalid, and Andrew. Would you like to ask another question? Okay, please raise your hand, guys, if you have any questions.
There's one in the sidebar from Ferdian. You answer that one.
Oh, okay, yes. Excuse me. Ferdian, okay. You also mentioned that the Densus 88, the counterterrorism institution in Indonesia, has the most effective operation. But a lot of experts in counterterrorism in Indonesia were under the US education. What differs the US and Indonesia's approach to extremism? Also, what differs the characteristics of extremism in Southeast Asia from the US perspective? So yeah, another question about counterterrorism. I guess this is a fascinating issue to be discussed in this forum. Okay.
No, it's a very good question. And I've spent, before I came into Asia, I worked in Iraq and Afghanistan for quite a while. I spent time in Kosovo when I was actually protecting was Christian extremists fighting against Muslims at the time we were protecting against. And so I've seen extremism from the Christian side. I've seen Islamic extremism in the Middle East. It's very hard to deal with extremist behavior of any sort, especially religious extremism. And we see it right now in the US with kind of Christian extremism. You see Hindu extremism in India, and you've had an issue with Islamic extremism in Indonesia in the past. And it's a very difficult issue to deal with. There's not an easy way to do it. And I think the US has no clear answers on how to do so. And I will say this is a case where the US learned from Indonesia as much as the opposite. When we had Indonesian officers in US courses, US staff courses, everybody wanted to hear the perspective on how to deal with extremism. And I just say there's a lot of things Indonesia did very well. And partially it's because it's the same country. It's easier to deal with it in your own country than try to go somewhere else and deal with it. But I think that just from a personal perspective, what everybody was really impressed by was the ability to rehabilitate people, which the US legal system doesn't really allow. Indonesia is able to take extremists who are really, first of all, I'll say that what Detkus 88 and across the board Indonesia did, which I think was effective, was really to really observe and learn about who the people they're dealing with are. And they decide who are the irreconcilables, who are the people who are so committed to violent extremism they can't be changed, identifying the kind of followers who are just not really very effective, not very, just sort of low-level people, and then the middle people who are maybe influenced by extremists, but able to turn, influential, but able to be turned. And their focus was really on that middle tier. And I think Indonesia did a phenomenal job of doing raids, identifying those middle tier people and trying to arrest them and then talk to them and find a way to turn them and then put them back in communities very quickly to change people's minds. And fighting counterterrorism in not a violent way, not a kinetic way. I mean, some people were still being arrested or killed, but the most part was this taking existing extremists and turning them against, and turning them, teaching them the error of their ways. I say turning them loosely, teaching them the error of their ways and putting them in communities where they're able to really make a difference. And I think that is pretty effective. No one else in the world has done it that way, nobody. I think everybody, to include the US, has a propensity towards arresting people and putting them in prison for a very long time, or using, as we say, kinetic strikes, killing people, extremists. And it just doesn't work that way, right? Certainly working in Iraq for a while, which if you kill somebody, you've created now, or you arrest or kill someone, you've created lots of enemies. Now the brother, the cousin are all your enemies, versus Indonesia's system of sort of going in there and taking people and changing their minds. And it's phenomenal. And I got to say, that's something we learned more from Indonesia than the other way around. And I think Indonesia, when I was working in embassies, we even talked about trying to export Indonesia's model elsewhere, put Indonesians in different countries to help train other countries, police forces, how to conduct counterterrorism. So again, I don't know what came of that, but I certainly think from a US perspective, certainly from a professional US perspective, from people who are working counterterrorism issues, there was a sense that Indonesia really had done better than anyone else in the world. And we could learn from Indonesia more than the other way around. I'm sure there's problems with it, don't get me wrong. I'm sure it's not perfect, but certainly it's better than anyone else has done, in my opinion.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Underreview, for your explanation. Well, we already have 5 audiences who asked their question. And maybe, yeah, we have some few minutes to wrap up the session, but maybe the last question will be delivered by myself. Mr. Andre Rivier, how has the, okay, first I'd like to be frank here that security and military diplomacy is not my focus of research, but I'm always fascinated in this issue. How has the development, the recent advent of issues like cybersecurity and digital diplomacy has changed the course of military diplomacy in the last 5 years? And from the US perspective, or maybe from the policy analyst perspective of the United States, how can you envision the future of the diplomacy between Indonesia and the United States in the next 5 or 10 years? What issues do you think will be most important, or should we anticipate in the next 10 years with the advent of this digitalization, especially in the military diplomacy? Okay, maybe that's a wrap-up question that maybe you can answer about this. Okay, thank you, sir.
No, very good question. And I was very much involved in this in the Pacific Islands. We were seeing attacks on the U.S. cyberspace done out of, Kiribati, a tiny country in the middle of the ocean, with a single police officer in charge of cybersecurity, working off a 1995 desktop computer and trying to be in charge of cyber. And the U.S. was being asked by Kiribati to help improve their systems. And that was my job as our attaché in that piece. And we had no good systems. Cybersecurity is very hard to cooperate on, simply because it's such a complicated issue. And people like me are just too old to understand it. People like embassies, we don't get it. It's really kind of young people out of college who really understand the issues and do it very well. So it is an area we struggled on. It also is a police function? Is it a defense function? Who owns cybersecurity is also a question of how we assist. And that matters and where money comes from to help. So cybersecurity is certainly an area of interest. It is a very important area, but it is very hard to cooperate on and always has been. I would also say that cybersecurity, in my opinion, is a little bit of an overrated issue in that it is very, we've looked at cybersecurity as its next wave of offense, where there's going to be, this is how you're going to start a war with a cyber attack on a different country. But I think that if you were very unprepared as a country to deal with cyber issues, it would be a problem. Certainly a foreign country could, for example, if a dam was connected to the internet, could find a way to open the floodgates and flood a valley. That's possible in theory. But everyone, to include Indonesia, to include the US, has taken all these critical infrastructure systems offline, have kind of closed ecosystems of capacity. One of their best features, and they were unable to use cyber against Ukraine in any meaningful way. They shut down some websites for 3 hours at most. There was very little over there. So I think cybersecurity is probably, I think the defense establishments looking at what happened with Russia and Ukraine and really looking at lessons from that and saying maybe it's not as important an issue as we thought it might be. I do think space is a major area of cooperation. So I think cyber is certainly an area, but maybe less important than we may have given it credit for. And there'll be cooperation, but maybe less than you might think. I will say space is an area I think we'll see some real cooperation with Indonesia and the US. Certainly the future of space in a war with China is very much up to debate. Or Russia, if the US and Russia go in a major fight, what happens to activities in space? And I'll bring up the idea of low Earth orbit, which is where most of the satellite communications, I'm sure that the talk I'm having with you right now is somehow going through in some way. This is to emerge is very much a major war with I say war, but a destruction of a lot of satellites in space. And I think they need to worry about space debris, what that means to the Earth, what it means to other satellites is an issue. This is an area I think the US will really step up cooperation on in the future. And I think Indonesia, being a large country with a substantial GDP, kind of a nascent space program, I think cooperation in space is an area where I think you'll see more. It really is complicated. That's an area where I think you'll see more on. I think you'll see a big push on environmental security issues right now. I know this goes in and out of fashion, but the idea of change being a major challenge under the it's still political in the US, but less so. Certainly when I was covering the Pacific Islands, there was starvation in Papua New Guinea, where a change in climate patterns and weather patterns, caused starvation for farmers in the mountains who had no real knowledge of the internet. They couldn't, new weather plans. They just sort of, because the spring came a week late, they weren't able to plant the crops effectively. And so I think you're going to see some issues with environmental security keep on becoming very important to U.S.-Indonesia cooperation, especially across the board, with climate change being one, but increasing storm areas where crops will fail, people starve. But that'll be a major issue. I know that right now we're focused very heavily on the kind of large war in Ukraine, the threat of China, but really climate remains a major challenge. And I do think that from the way the defense has got a major role, U.S. defense has a major role in climate issues and security, not necessarily by design, but we do. And I think we'll see a lot of cooperation there, what that looks like. And Indonesia and the U.S. may respond. I think U.S. and Indonesia will work together in peacekeeping more and more, and possibly regional peacekeeping forces doing disaster response, responding to more climate disasters. I think we'll see a lot of growth in that industry as well, helping out other countries, helping Indonesia for islands that are affected by storms, by salt water rising up, just damaging crops. That's a major area. So I said space, climate change being key issues. And I'd say also, I think you'll see more and more cooperation on community interoperability, which is how we talk, how we work together. I think you'll see a big push to find ways to really operate together effectively in the event, for example, of a fight off the coast of the Tuna Islands, what that might look like, how we communicate, how we share information, how if an Indonesian aircraft can talk effectively to a U.S. warship or submarine, how do we share intelligence? Right now, U.S. intelligence sharing is very much wrapped up in complicated computer security protocols, declassification issues, which makes it very hard to share in real time. We're cracking the code in Ukraine right now. There's a big operation in Ukraine that the U.S. is running, which is really pushing that forward. But I think you'll see the same in Indonesia in the future as well. So I think you'll see following Ukraine, I think you'll see a big step forward in intelligence sharing, intelligence cooperation as well, how we can communicate together to deal with problems and have the systems in place where we're not spending to get an intelligence report from the U.S. to Indonesia, making it much more real time, rapid declassification, and having agreed protocols on both sides. That means Indonesia's got to have security protocols and communications that meet U.S. standards, and vice versa. So those are three big areas I would say, just guessing. So space, environmental, and then that communications, intelligence sharing, I think will be the next big push for security cooperation. But who knows? The thing about the world is you never know what the next event will be. I have no idea. I really don't what will happen next. And so, God forbid something serious in the Pakistan border, or if something serious happens, the situation in Myanmar gets worse, or something like that happens, you'll see a sudden change of a focus somewhere else. I think the key is to be prepared for the unexpected, and just sort of understand that there'll be opportunities down the road and challenges. But I think the key in international relations is to find the opportunities that you can to build relationships. When you see an opportunity, you just have to work together and make it happen. And a lot of that is what people in embassies do, what people who are working kind of low level, or I say kind of working level security cooperation and cooperation across the board, look for opportunities and just use those issues to really, make it something positive, find a silver lining in the cloud to really move forward. And I think that's what we'll see a bit as well. Sorry for the very long answer to your question. It was a good question though.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Rivier. Okay, actually we have one brief follow-up question by Ms. Renita. Is focusing her studies in the topic of Chinese weapon. So her question is, how far is the development of artificial intelligence and Chinese weapon in supporting the U.S. military power? So a brief question that follows up the previous one. Okay.
So I may not know very much about that, to be very frank. Things I don't know about. I'm sure there's a lot of things I don't know, but I think that probably not very much. I think that's an area where there's a lot of concerns from an American perspective on what autonomous weapons might look like. quite frankly, the U.S., I don't see us ever outsourcing a kill or no kill decision to a machine. I don't see that, frankly, ever. I think the concern where you see artificial intelligence being used is more for example, a dogfight, air-to-air combat by a drone, where you have an existing target already designated by the, we already designated the target as a bad target, as an enemy target, and then the computer's making a decision. There's not enough time for the upload. But I think as far as like autonomous drones killing terrorists, never going to happen. I don't see it ever passing muster. I mean, U.S. law prohibits that. I mean, even to release weapons in war requires a high-level officer, and even the low-level people can't give that permission. So, and we've had near misses. I mean, there was an issue. The closest we ever came to World War III was not the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was actually an issue where a Russian missile caught fire in Siberia back in the 60s, or I want to say 50s, 60s. And the U.S. picked up the fire. And at that point, we had a policy, launch on warning, where the U.S. was then supposed to fire missiles back before the missiles reached altitude. And luckily, the operator said, wait, hold off. Let's not launch missiles yet, and avoided the war. But that was a terrifying experience for U.S. policymakers, even having that idea that we were going to have a serious. So a long way of saying there's no way. Maybe I'm wrong, but I would say 99% I'm correct. There's no way the U.S. will ever provide AI the decision about kill or no kill.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Andre, for your explanation. Okay, well, guys, what a discussion we had. And unfortunately, we are running out of time. So I would like to just pinpoint some interesting points we've got this morning, or in this session. First of all, we've heard that under Rivier explanation that Indonesia and the US has had such a vibrant relations, especially in terms of security and military relations. And as time changes, from time to time, we've seen that the importance of Indonesia in the US foreign policy is also increasing. So I guess we can about the prospect of relationship between Indonesia and the United States in the future. We have the same interest, especially in keeping the stability of the region. And if we correlate it to the fact that we are now the natural leader, the so-called natural leader of the Southeast Asia region, I guess we can capitalize on this to make region safer, a more stable place. And also, for the next three issues that we can focus on in the future, we've got space as the international issue. We also have the climate change or environmental issue, and also maybe in the future, see that the communication of intelligence is the next big thing that Indonesia and the United States can focus on. So for some of our students, for the students who our audience in this place, I hope these issues can be the next topic of your papers, guys. So this can hopefully be a brainstorming session for you guys, especially when thinking about your next paper on the United States relations between Indonesia. Okay, as I promised, the Consulate General of the United States in Surabaya would like to give some appreciation to the audiences who have asked their questions. So maybe I give the stage for a while to Mas Puku. Would you please take the stage for a while to give some appreciation for our audience? Excuse me, you are not audible, Mas Puku.
Me?
Yes, you are audible now. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Yes, so thank you so much. Then the discussion was running very, very good. I mean, like the participants were very enthusiastic. And thank you so much, Andre. It's nice to meet you virtually. based on some your statements that you have already worked with the post in Bangladesh. Correct me if I'm wrong. So yeah, you shared your experience really well to all the audience. It's great. It's great thing for us. And as Mas Arya just mentioned, that there are 5 great questions. I hope that Mas Reza from Madat or Mbak Faricha who could take notes, or let's say who have already had their questions, you can address to Faricha or Reza from Madat Club, because we will send the souvenirs to Madat. Once again, Mas Reza, I don't know whether Mas Reza can show off, show his face or not, but it's a great opportunity for us to work together during this month. Commemorate George McTernan Kahin as one of American Indonesians in the United States of America. Thank you so much, Mas Aryo. I will over to you again. Once again, Andre, thank you so much. And like regards from our colleagues here from Consulate General Surabaya. Hopefully we can meet.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. We'll hope so too.
Okay. Thank you, Mas Puku, from the Consulate General of the United States in Surabaya, Indonesia. Well, that concludes our discussion session. First of all, I would like to thank you, Mr. Rivier, for such an enlightening discussion. Yeah, I got the military relations between Indonesia and the United States, and I hope the audience are too. You can maybe take notes of some topics that you can focus on, especially for our students here. And thank you for the Madat Club, who have entrusted me as the moderator to guide the discussion today. Thank you, Mbak Renita. Thank you, Mas Puku from the Consulate General of the US. Thank you for our audience, and hopefully you guys have a good day and stay healthy. Yeah, thanks for your participation, and don't forget, jangan lupa teman-teman, untuk yang sudah bertanya, tadi saya mencatat ada beberapa nama, Gideon, Haikal, Khalid, Andrew, dan Ferdian. Please drop your, I don't know, drop your email or maybe drop your contacts in the chat room so that the committee can contact you for the communication about the token of appreciation for your such questions today. Oke, terima kasih untuk teman-teman yang sudah hadir. Saya Aryo Bimo Utomo selaku moderator pamit undur diri. Thank you very much for your attention. Good morning, and I give the stage back to the host. Thank you.
Happy weekend, everyone.